We on there, guys? There we go. I think I put the microphone on the opposite way that I normally do, which means it's going around the front. So if I choke and drop over partway through the service, you know I choked myself with my own mic. Today we're going to be in the book of John. Last week we said we were going to start a new series, and we are going to start a new series. We're going to go through the book of John. The book of John is a basic book. It's interesting. It's got stories in it. If I was going to talk to somebody about the possibility of a new believer, someone that just came to Christ, oftentimes we tell them, if you want to read the Bible, read through the book of John, because it's kind of a simple book. It's not real difficult, and it's one that can, thank you very much, Jim, that'll give you a good background of what God is doing in your life. And so I'd like you all to, if you bring your own Bibles, take it and look into the book of John, because that's the book where we'll be, and you can follow along. It's also in your pew there. If you want to pick one up, we use the New American Standard Bible in the pew. Not that that's the only one, but that's just the one we happen to use. When we talk about the book of John, some of the questions we come into: who is Jesus? We've not seen Jesus ourselves, but there's a lot of paintings. But the people that have written paintings are really not people that have seen Jesus. They're just kind of, drawing their figures of what they think he might look like. So you wind up with a lot of paintings. You line up with a lot of sculptures. You line up a lot of different essays that are written, things that are written down. Sometimes you wind up, as you're looking through things, you wind up in musicals. Back in my day, there was a musical called Jesus Christ Superstar. How many remember that? They still do that, don't they? Every once in a while you hear it, kind of, I guess it's a classic now at this point in time. But, they've made movies about Jesus Christ, the Last Temptation. And now they got the Jesus film, and there's all kinds of films talking about Jesus Christ. But who is he really? The best way to get to know Jesus is to get to know him from somebody that had a first-hand experience with him and actually knew Jesus, and that was John. John was a good friend of Jesus. In fact, he was a relative of Jesus. We believe it was the first cousin of Jesus. That Mary and his mother were possibly sisters. As you look at the book of John and who Jesus is, we find that there are actually 4 books that were written about him, contemporary to him, and they're called the Gospels. But the Gospels have 4 of them, and we've talked about this before. If you want to get a picture of someone or a picture of an accident that took place or whatever, you're going to interview more than one person. If I asked, I'm going to pick on the Gettys this morning because they're here, okay? If I asked you what your father was like, you'd give me one story, wouldn't you? Would your description of your father, who happens to be sitting right there, be the exact same as, say, your sister? Would she have a different opinion, you think, of your dad, a different perspective? Yeah, of what your dad was like? Through her eyes, it might be a little bit different, yeah. And how about you? A little different? Yeah, probably so. And so even in the same family, if we're going to find out what your mom is like, what your dad, don't just ask one person. If you talk to my sister and I, you would think we grew up in 2 totally different families. Totally different families. Not that our experiences were that much difference, but her perspective of my mom and dad and our family is totally different than mine. And it's funny because the other day, she's one of the missionaries we support here. She's in Sweden. And a person will be coming here for a number of years. And we got talking, and I said, somehow the Martins came up in our discussion. I said, she's my sister. She said, no, she's your sister? It's like, I can't believe that. And sometimes we can't believe it either. But you get different perspectives. And so we have 4 Gospels, and each one of them gives a different perspective of somebody that they knew very closely. But they're coming from different backgrounds. One's a tax gatherer who was a traitor to the Jewish people, Matthew. One was a very close friend of Jesus Christ, in fact, of Peter. In fact, he was the one that probably ran out of the Garden of Gethsemane with no clothes on, to kind of get away from the guards. That was Mark. You've got Luke, who was an historian and is going to give Mary's perspective and detail it. And these three synoptics we think were written even before the Gospel of John. And the story goes, and I've just read it for actually the first time, even in studying for this again. Didn't remember it from ever before, but there's a story that the three Gospels were brought to John, and I don't know if this actually took place. It might just be folklore, and said, these three all tell the same thing. Is there something different that we need to know about Jesus? And John agreed and said, there is, and I'm going to write my gospel, but I'm going to write it totally different. And so there's a lot of the things that are in what we call the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that don't even appear in John. And there's a lot of things that appear in John that don't appear in the other three Gospels. And so we're going through the book of John, look at some of it. Some of this was an encouragement from my wife. She was looking at she said, you haven't done John for a long time. She said, I really enjoyed that series. Now, that was 30 years ago, But, so we're going to look through the book of John. And as I said, it's one of the basic ones that people say, if a new believer wants to know about Jesus, read through the book of John. Not really simple, but it's easier to understand, and it's got some real depth to it that is really important. It's also written in a basic Greek style. If any of you, I don't know if anybody here's been to seminary, Pastor Ed has, if you took Greek, a lot of times you take Greek, they call the first Greek class baby Greek. You've been to seminary also, baby Greek, okay? And the book they have you read and translate is the book of John, because it's easy, And so when I would take my Greek, sometimes my Greek New Testament, I'd read the book of John as well as the English to try to get up on what it is, because it's not a super complicated book with tons of different terms in it, but it's got a lot of neat stuff that we're going to be looking at as we go. The goal, if you go to the next slide, guys, is the goal of the gospel is this particular verse, which comes at the end of the book. It says, but these things, John's saying, these things I've written in my book, so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. Matthew described him as, the king. Luke described him as the Son of Man. John's going to describe him as the Son of God. He wants to bring out his divinity and how he is God himself, and how he can come and have an effect in your life and bring you and the world to Jesus Christ. So we're going to take a look at John. So if you want to take your Bibles and turn to John chapter 1, we're going to go through the first 18 verses today. Kind of not super detailed, but in a little bit of depth as we look through them, break them down. And I'm going to ask that we all stand and read these verses together. John chapter 1, verse 1 through 18. I'm going to stand and read them with you here. Let's just all read them together as we go through this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There came a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify about the light, so that all who might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came that he might testify about the light. There was the true light, which coming into the world enlightens every man. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name, who are born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified about him and cried out, saying, This is he of whom I said, He who comes after me has a higher rank than I, for he existed before me. For of his fullness we have all received, and grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. You may be seated. If you want to take your bulletins, not your bulletins, but your notes out, let's take a look at John, and I'm going to go through these a little bit. There's 6 things in this section that I want you to see about the Jesus Christ from the book of John. John's the 4th book of Gospel, as we said, and I'm going to turn there. Just give me a couple more seconds. And let's take a brief look at this today. First of all, he starts off with the 3 words, in the beginning. Does that make sense? Sound familiar to anybody? Genesis 1:1, right. In the beginning. John wants us to know right from the beginning he's going to identify Jesus as God. In the Old Testament, it says, in the beginning what? God created. In the beginning here, it says, in the beginning, if you're looking at the Word. In the beginning, the Word. And so he's making this parallel between who Jesus Christ is and the Word. In fact, far be it from me, I'm not as smart as a lot of the guys that preceded me, but if I were putting the order of the Gospels in order, I would place John as the first book, because I think John really intended his book to parallel the first book of the New Testament, to parallel the first book of the Old Testament. And then I'd stick Luke as the last one, because Luke is a 2-volume set with what other book? Acts. And so I would put Luke, Acts right together, and so I'd probably put John, Matthew, Luke, Mark, Luke, Acts is the way I do it. But in the beginning, God. Now, for some of you who are baseball fans, you realize that this was the first mention of baseball in the Bible, right? In the big inning. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's something you want to keep in mind as we go through. But back to serious things. John was important. There are a number of things that I want to mention here. Just let me go through this. The Word was with God. So first of all, he starts in the beginning, the Word. So he's paralleling it to God. And the Word was with God. This means that in the beginning, the Word was with God. So we have someone that is co-equal, someone that is eternal, because he was there when God was there. Nothing else was there when God was there. God created everything else. But Jesus was not created. He was with God in the beginning. And then if you're confused, he wants to go on and make it very clear. He not only was eternal in the beginning with the Word, he's not only coexistent, the Word was with God, but also he was divine. The Word was God. He wants to say that very plainly so that everybody knows it. Now, there are some of organizations and groups out there, religious groups, that we call cults, okay? They don't like to be called cults. Get very offended by it, but we call them cults. I call them cults because this very thing is the thing that they do not recognize. And the 2 I'll mention just briefly is the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons. Neither one accept Jesus Christ as God himself, okay? The Jehovah's Witnesses, and I should have brought my Bible, I have one of their, I call it perversions, but one of their versions of the Bible, their translations of the Bible in my office. They translate this particular section because they had a belief that Jesus Christ was not God. And if they took almost every single translation of the Bible in this section would say the Word was God. And so they can't have that. And so they translate this in their Bible. The Word was a God. The Word was a God. That's how they put it in. Now, the word was a God is not proper. If you actually look at the Greek, okay, and I'm not going to, in fact, I don't think I have it on the slides. I have it in my notes here. I was going to put it in the slides, and I think I forgot. But the Greek actually is theos un o logos, okay? It really is theos, you get the thea, okay, God. Theos, God was the Word. That's how it would really, if we're going to really translate that, we'd have to say God was the Word. So the fact that they take it and say the Word was a God is not really a valid reason. I'm not going to go into all the Greek details. The Granville-Sharp rule comes into effect here, but I'm not going to go into that kind of stuff. All I'm going to say is that the Word was a God is not proper. It should be God was the Word. And so he makes it very clear that this is God himself. The Mormons, and let me just read a couple things so you understand what they're saying. How they translate this, how they deal with this, I don't know. But they don't believe the Bible's infallible, so it doesn't matter what it says. You know, it could be wrong or it could be right. That's the way they look at it. I didn't want to tell you what somebody else said about the Mormons or the Latter-day Saints are called. So I went on a website that was actually their website. These are the two quotes, and this will just give you an instance of how they look at God, which is why I believe they're wrong. They say, Mormons believe, this is from their website, that all men and women ever to be born, including Jesus Christ, live with God as his spirit children before this life. So we were all pre-existence. We all lived before there. We just don't have any knowledge of it, but we all were existence from the very beginning, just like Jesus Christ. So we're all pre-existent. Mormons believe that God wanted each of us to come to earth. God wanted each of us to come to earth to gain experience, learn, and grow to become more like him. Mormons believe that Jesus Christ was chosen to be this Savior long ago during our pre-mortal life with God. So in other words, we're all living with these pre-mortal spirits, and God for some reason says, I'm going to let you all become humans, but Jesus Christ, I want you to become the Savior of all the other humans for some reason. I don't know what it is. But that's their belief of God. He's just kind of like all of us. The second quote from them is from a guy named Jess Christensen. He's the Institute of Religion Director at Utah State University, Logan, and of course that's prime Mormon territory. He says this on their website. On first hearing the doctrine, and this is talking about Lucifer, Satan. On first hearing the doctrine of Lucifer, that Lucifer and our Lord Jesus Christ are brothers, may seem surprising to some. Are you surprised by that? Okay. Especially to those unacquainted with latter-day revelations. So revelations that took place long after the Bible. But both the scriptures and the prophets affirm that Jesus Christ, and I don't know where they get this prophets from, Jesus Christ and Lucifer are indeed offspring of our Heavenly Father and therefore spirit brothers. Jesus was Lucifer's older brother. That's the Mormon doctrine. So both go against what this scripture and John's whole purpose is to teach, that Jesus Christ was God. We call him the Son of God, and that's the relation of the Trinity together, but Jesus Christ, the Word, was God, hands down. Verse 2 says he was in the beginning with God. It's a re-emphasis, no doubt, to make sure that we know that he's eternal and divine. So as we go on to the verses 3 and 4, we don't only find that the Word was God, but the Word was life. The Word was life. And there's two kinds of lives here. If you look at verse 3, it says, all things came into being by him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. Jesus Christ was the creator. So when you go back to Genesis, it doesn't name Jesus Christ, but it says there, let us plural, make man in our image. Who's the us and our? It's the Trinity, okay? Jesus Christ was the creator God. Everything came into existence. If you want to look at Colossians chapter 1, verses 16 and 17 from Paul, it says this, for by him, that's Jesus Christ, all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Jesus Christ is the creator God. That's what he's saying here. He gave physical life. I don't think it's just a brief detour here, because as we're talking about life, something comes very close to my heart, okay? And I think it talks about physical life. God honors physical life. The second thing we're going to find, he honors spiritual life. On Friday, there was a big protest, or big march in Washington. I don't know if any of you saw it. Probably wasn't covered very well on most of the news stations. But it was like the, 45th annual Right to Life March, okay? I was back in high school. It was 1973 when Roe v. Wade from the Supreme Court allowed abortion to take place, okay, and started. I'm not going to go into a whole sermon on it, but I just think that we as Christians should be aware of a few facts that probably most people don't hear, and they don't advertise them anyplace else. So this is kind of the only place, because the media doesn't want you to hear this kind of stuff. But let me just give you a couple statistics before we move on to the next thing. Since 1973, when they legalized abortion, we've had 60 million abortions in the United States since 73. Annually, every single year, they estimate, of course they don't have documentation for every single abortion takes place, but in countries and so forth, annually, there's an average for this is the last 4 years put together, I think 14 to 18, average 56 million abortions every single year in the entire world. including Europe and Africa and all the other countries, to China and so forth, all these countries. The annual abortions in the United States right now, this is statistics from a research group in 2016, the latest that we have from them, 885,000 abortions 1 year. 885,000 abortions in 1 year. Now let me put that in perspective. Morrisville, I checked it out yesterday, has 8,600 people living in it. That's every year 100 towns the size of Morrisville are aborted in the United States. 100 towns with a population of Morrisville aborted every single year in the United States. Planned Parenthood, of course, is at the forefront of a lot of this, has 650 centers. So I went on their annual report from July of 17 through June of 18. So this is from their statistics themselves. This is not somebody else saying something about them. They have 357 centers which do abortions. They performed in this last year 332,757 abortions. Now, if you take that abortions and divide that out, that's 900 abortions every single day. That is 38 abortions every single hour. That is 3 abortions every 5 minutes. So if I've been talking about this for 5 minutes now, 3 abortions have taken place. In the place of one service, if we say it's an hour and 15 minutes, 5 minutes, that's what, 12, 13, 15. 15 times 5 comes out to what? 75? 75 abortions while you're sitting in this church service today. That's the average. That's how many they did, just Planned Parenthood last year. And that's only a portion of what the abortions are done in the United States. 70% of their clinics are located within walking distance of ethnic neighborhoods. That's their target population, pretty much. 34% of their income comes from the government. So when you pay your taxes, 34% of their money to do these abortions comes from your tax dollars. So when you go to the polls, you're thinking, oh, should I vote for somebody that's pro-life or pro-choice? I call them pro-abortion. You need to make this decision because they're the ones that are doing this. Recently, we've had a change in who's taking control of the House. Already, I've heard that the pro-abortion conclave of senators, of congressmen, have decided that they're going to try to undo any pro-life laws that have taken place in the last 2 years since the Senate and the House were controlled by a different party. So we have just something we need to think. We talk about social justice. We talk about immigration. We talk about all these other things. When you talk about social justice, one of the things that flies under the radar of everybody is this social justice for the unborn child. They're just, these are some of the stats, okay? I'm going to leave it there. The second thing we go to, I will have this one verse. Proverbs 14:34 says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. You ask me why when I vote do I find the position on life and abortion from the people I vote for? This is why. Jesus also gives, though, it says spiritual life, because in verse 3 it says he's the creator, he brings us physical life, but in verse 4 it says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. So now he's talking about the spiritual life, and this fact that he gives us spiritual life. And have a lot of verses here, and we just don't have time to go through all these. We got 15 minutes left, actually 10 minutes from me, so I'm just going to, I'll mention them, but John 3:16 will not. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Life is used 54 times in the book of the Gospel of John and in 1 John. Life is an important theme. If you saw that John 20:31 we read earlier, talked about life. John 5:24, if you come to God, you've passed from death into life. John 11:25 and 26 to Mary and Martha. I am the resurrection and the, John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the, I keep on going through John, and we'll come across a lot of these. 1 John 5:11 to 13, one of my favorites. The witness is this, that God has given us eternal, and this is in his Son. He who has the Son has the, he who is not of the Son of God does not have the important. So life is a key thing. He's given us spiritual life, and this is why he's written this book. So you who are here may know that you not only have physical life, which is important, but you can have spiritual life. Okay? It's interesting, Dwight L. Moody in the early days was assigned to preach a funeral sermon. He never preached a funeral sermon, so he said, I'll go through the Gospels and find a funeral sermon. He couldn't find any. The reason was, every time Jesus Christ came across somebody who was dead, he raised them from the dead. So there were no funeral sermons of Jesus in the Bible. Because Jesus concentrates on life. The third thing we have is the Word was light. The light shines in darkness. Okay? Light shines in darkness. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. 1 John 1:5. 1 John 2:9 and 11. He continues this theme in his epistle. The one who says he is in the light and yet hates his brothers in darkness. We all know about darkness. How many love darkness? Anybody? How many people like light? Okay, I'll tell you a secret. When I was a little kid, my room was right near the top of the steps, and right outside my room was the hall light. I would not go to sleep without the hall light on. God forbid, there were some nights when I stayed awake till my parents came up and turned the light on. Then I had to go sleep with that light off. I love the light on. My wife says, turn the light off. And I would still like to live with the whole light on, you know? Turn the light off. Now, I don't know why she doesn't like to go to sleep in the light. We can be watching a TV with the blaring and all the lights on, and she's snoring up a storm, but she wants the lights off when she goes to bed, okay? But I like the light. I wanted the light on. How many of you have stubbed your toe walking in the darkness? Okay? Anybody broken their toe? Yeah, 3, yeah. Yeah, it hurts, doesn't it? Darkness. If you're in the light and you walk into darkness, you can't see. And that's kind of what we are. If we're Christians and we walk into the darkness again, it's even harder for us to see. The people that live in darkness can see a little bit because they're always there. Their eyes eventually get used to it. And they think that darkness is okay because they've never seen the light. But for us who have seen the light, the darkness can really be scary. And if you walk from a bright situation into a dark one, I mean, the army, you go out from a bright site, you walk into one of their tents, they're all closed up, and boy, you have to wait there for a few seconds before you can see anything. Light is so important, and the devil wants us to remain in darkness. He loves Lois and I went for our 40th wedding anniversary, went to Scranton. We went into one of those coal mines. I forget the name of it now, like something or other. Went to the coal mine, get way down in the depths, and he said, now, you'll never see darkness like this. He turned off every single light. I mean, honestly, you couldn't see anything here. I could put my finger, nothing. Then put on one light, and all of a sudden what a difference it makes. What a difference you can make in your place of work, in your school, if you are in the light, because they are all in darkness. If you're a teacher at a school, if you're a worker at some place in a job, you can be the light. Jesus was the light, but then John says in verses 6 through 9 that he was a witness of that light, and in numerous places. And if you look later on in this chapter, we'll get into it next week probably. He says numerous times, "I am not the light. Jesus is the light." He constantly points people, says, "Behold the man." Someone else. I'm not the light. Someone else is. In verse 10, it says, if you look at it, it says these words. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. In fact, if you look at verse 9, let's go back even to verse 9. It says, there was the true light which came into the world, enlightening every man. There are fake lights. Jesus is the true light, He's the true light that can take us the right direction. You say, well, what's a false light look like? Well, let me give you a couple ideas. Satan. Let's just think about him, okay? Let me give you 2 verses about Satan. One is in 2 Corinthians 11:14. It says this, "No wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light." To the world out there, if you can't get through to some unbelieving person out there, you can't explain to them. You think, what's the matter with these? I've had that even on politics or other kind of discussions. I'm thinking, why don't they see this? And with Christianity especially, why don't they understand what I'm trying to say? They don't understand. Because he wants to be the angel of light. He wants to attract them. But then it says in 2 Corinthians 4:4, "In whom the God of this world," who is Satan, the god of this world, Satan, hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine into them. So we have Satan that is blinding the minds of the unbeliever, which is putting them into what? Darkness. But he's acting as an angel of light so he can attract them into darkness, total darkness, so they don't see the light. He is the fake light. He doesn't want them introduced to the light of Jesus Christ, which is in you if you know Jesus Christ. If you do not know Jesus Christ, you can have his light today. Matthew 22:14, one of my little presidents of PHCB used to rephrase this. It says, many are called, but few are chosen. He used to say, many are called, but few ever show up. Many are called, but few ever show up. It says here that he enlightens every man in verse 9. Everyone has the light of Jesus. They can see it. All you have to do, it says in Psalm, look at the creation. I mean, you can't believe there's not, look at creation and believe there's not a God. Some people do it, you know. But the evidence of Jesus Christ, he enlightens every man who is willing. Many are called, but few ever show up. It's up to you. Have you chosen Jesus Christ? You get a choice in this matter. The light is there, but you get a choice if you want it or not. My wife just had cataract surgery. She'll be here in second service. So she's wearing she wore a patch over her eye for the first day. She's got to be sensitive to light and so forth because light can harm us some ways. And so, you know, you think of that. But the world needs cataract surgery. She needed cataract surgery because her light, she couldn't see as well. You know, it was getting, the lens was getting darker. So they removed the lens and put an artificial lens in there so she can see. That's what the world needs. Artificial. They need cataract surgery so they can see, but Satan doesn't want that. The fourth thing, the Word was unknown, verses 10 and 11. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. It came to his own, and his own did not receive him. The world, Jesus Christ is the creator. He made all of us. He came into the world doesn't receive him. Broad is the road that leads to destruction. But not only that, God's chosen people, the people that God chose himself, the Jews, they even rejected him. They're the ones that put him on the cross. Can you imagine if you made something that had life, and we can't do that. But you can imagine if you created something that had life and all of a sudden it rejected you? That's what happened to Jesus Christ. He made us and everybody rejected him. But even his people rejected him. He was unknown. But the Word in verse 12 and 13 became known. The Word became known. But, now I don't know. How many people like the word but? You know, if it's, you know, how do you like that? You did a great job today on the playing field, but. You don't want to hear that, you know. You did a great job on this project I gave you at work, but. We hate those. But how about, you know, normally I think you would not have the ability to do this, but. That's a different kind of but, isn't it? And that's the but here. The world doesn't know him, but as many as received him, those that gave the power to become the children of God. I love that but. Some buts are bad and some buts are good. This but is good. As many as received him. The world is a light to him. You have the light. It's your choice. Do you want to live in the light or do you want to live in the darkness? Do you want to know the Word or do you want to not know the Word? It's your choice. Now, before you go too far and get too puffed up saying, hey, it's my decision, I want to remind you of Ephesians 2:8 and 9. Because it says, in fact, go to the next slide, guys. I have it up here for you. For by grace you have been saved through faith and not of yourselves. It is a gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no one may boast. And John brings that up here in the next verse. Look at verse 13. It says, but as many as received him, to them gave the power to become the children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood. In other words, not because you're a Jewish line, your parents were Christians. Not of the will of the flesh, just because you want a good time. Not of your own will, the will of man, but of God. God is the one who chose us. God has a work in this. And so when we receive him, we can't, as it says in Ephesians 2:89, it says, I boast about it. God gave you the light. He enlightened you. And he's drawing you to himself. All you do need to do is accept. But that acceptance, as it says here, through faith, that's not even ourselves. That's a gift of God. Because typically we would not accept Jesus Christ. We'd be like all the other world says, that's a bunch of crazy baloney. I'm going to do my own thing. Why should I go to church and try to be a good person? I can be a horrible person and enjoy it, you know? They don't realize that that's not enjoyment. The Word became known. And then lastly, 14 to 18, the Word became human. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. He dwelt with us. Emmanuel, God with us. It says we beheld his glory. That happened at the transfiguration for these guys. Verse 17, for the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. So for those who were thinking, oh, I got all these laws I got to do from the Old Testament, saying, no, the law came through Moses, but Jesus brings you grace and truth. And he's going to go on to explain that through this particular section. I want to particularly point out this verse 18. It says, no one has seen God at any time, the only begotten God. The only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained to him. If there's any doubt in your mind whether John was proclaiming Jesus Christ as God, there it is. He didn't say the only begotten Son. He said the only begotten God. And it says Jesus Christ has revealed him. Do you want to see God? How do you see God? Look at Jesus. Look at Jesus. Jesus is God. Thomas asked him, you know, haven't we seen you? In fact, I wrote the passage down. I'm not going to read it to you now, but John chapter 14, look at it. Thomas said, you know, show us the Father. And Jesus said, I've been so long with you, Thomas, and you don't know that if you see me, you've seen the Father. You know? You're looking at him. Jesus Christ is God. Don't let anyone tell you anything differently. As we close this morning, my theme is just kind of pulling all these various things together. Knowing Jesus allows us to see God and gives us light and new life. Do you want to live in darkness? Or do you want to live in light? Do you want to live the old way when you were in control? Or do you want to live in the new way with Jesus in control? Do you really want to see God? Look to Jesus. Dear Lord, we thank you for your love for us. We thank you for the Jesus Christ who we can see and gives us a picture of who you are, your character and your love, your compassion that we'll see coming through in Jesus' life in the next following Sundays. We just thank you for this passage in John. This is your incarnation story. It doesn't talk about a manger or shepherds or angels or an inn, but it talks about you, the real you. Help us to see God in you and through you. In Jesus' name, amen.